Welcome to the Deep Dive. And a special thank you for actually leaving Facebook to come and listen to this deep dive into a murder trial you've probably never heard of until now.
From Caldwell County, Kentucky, of all places. Right on the cusp of the Civil War.
Exactly. We're opening a set of files today that honestly feel less like dusty old court records and more like a blueprint for how a whole community just comes apart at the seams.
We're focusing, intensely on Caldwell County in 1860. This is, a moment in American history when all those big political fault lines that are about to just shatter the nation, they're already causing these deep, really personal and, ultimately fatal fractures inside neighborhoods, and in this case, inside one very, very toxic family.
Absolutely. So this deep dive is all about the 1860 murder trial of a man named Thomas B. Wadlington. He was accused and then convicted of killing his own stepson, Milton A. Cartwright.
And the sources we have are just incredible. It's not just one thing. We're talking court orders that span almost 2 decades of instability. We've got biographical sketches that really bring the main players to life.
And the most critical part, I think, are these highly conflicting, deeply personal affidavits. You've got one from the victim's mother, who's also the killer's wife.
I mean, can you imagine?
It's unbelievable. And then you have statements from the witnesses and from all of the accused's powerful political friends. It's a mess.
So our mission today really is to try and uncover the truth that's buried under all this. And it's not just about, who done it. The court figured that out pretty quickly.
I know who pulled the trigger.
Exactly. It's about understanding the forces that drove this specific act of violence. We're going to try and cut through the political maneuvering, the class warfare, and just the raw bias that decided who got believed and why.
And the result was this trial that saw a really prominent, wealthy man sentenced to be hanged. It was this flashpoint of social breakdown in the American South right before everything exploded.
So let's just get right into it, because the thing that started all of this, the catalyst, it wasn't some grand political statement.
No, it wasn't a blood feud that had been simmering for generations or anything like that. It was almost ridiculously mundane. It was a fight over wood.
That's it, a dispute over wood and rail timber. And that's really the core tragedy of it all, isn't it? It grounds the whole story in the economic reality of 1860 Kentucky.
This was basically a high-stakes, violent inheritance dispute.
But in a rural setting where land and what you could get from that land was, it was everything. It was the only measure of wealth and, frankly, survival.
And this piece of property was central to the family's security. It was land that was allotted to Mary A.J. Wadlington, who is, again, the accused killer's wife and the victim's mother, as her dower.
We should probably pause there for a second, because that word dower it's the legal foundation for this whole thing.
It really is. In 19th century law, dower was the widow's share, right?
Right.
It was a life estate, usually in about 1/3 of the lands her husband owned.
Exactly. It was meant to secure her financially after her husband's death. But, and this is the crucial part, that use was almost always conditional. Mary was the widow of a man named James A. Cartwright, who died around 1850.
And when she got her dower, the agreement didn't just give her the land outright. It gave her the use of its resources.
And there was this one specific, seemingly harmless clause that became the literal flashpoint for the whole murder. It said she had the privilege of using timber from the land for firewood or for rails.
But only.
Only for the use of the land set apart to her.
So the wood had to be used to maintain her specific dower land. It couldn't just be cut and sold or, used to build a fence on her new husband's property next door.
And that's exactly where the conflict starts. Because we have this chilling detail from Mary Wadlington's own affidavit. And again, she's in this impossible position, married to the killer, mother of the victim.
What does she say?
She says that her husband, Thomas B. Wadlington, started cutting timber off this dower land simply because it was the most convenient for them.
Wow, convenient.
That one word is just devastating, isn't it? He chose convenience over the legal contract, and he chose it over peace with his stepson. Mary says that single action just shattered the 18 months of friendship and neighborship that had existed between them.
So that was the moment Wadlington chose his own convenience over the very fragile peace in this blended family.
And the thing is, the land ownership here was complicated. Milton Cartwright, the victim, he had a real long-term financial stake in that timber.
How so?
Well, the records show that he had actually bought out the interests of all his brothers and sisters in the land, allotted to a affiant as dower.
Okay, so while his mom had the right to use it for her lifetime?
Milton owned the underlying interest. The land and everything on it would eventually go back to him. So every single tree Wadlington cut for his own convenience was literally him stealing from Milton's future inheritance.
So that's the ambiguity that gets someone killed. Was Wadlington cutting timber for legitimate dower use, which would be legal, or for his own use, which was basically theft from his stepson?
That difference was literally worth a life in 1860 Caldwell County.
Before we even get to the killing itself, we have to understand the people in this volatile triangle.
We have to, and we have to start with Mary A.J. Wadlington, the matriarch at the absolute center of this catastrophe.
She's the widow of James A. Cartwright, and now at the time of the shooting, she's the wife of Thomas B. Wadlington, the man who was about to kill her son. She'd already lost one husband, and now she's watching her second husband and her son basically destroy each other over a pile of firewood.
The sources show a woman who, on paper was meticulously provided for. Her legal settlement after her first husband's death was very specific.
What did she get?
She was entitled to all the enslaved people and lands from a pre-marriage contract, all the household furniture, plus an additional $406 in cash, which was a lot of money then.
A significant sum, yeah.
And even the use of the northwest room, both upstairs and down, in the main house for the rest of her life. It was a very carefully constructed settlement designed for total stability.
But legal stability doesn't mean a thing when the people involved are determined to fight.
No. And her affidavit gives us this crucial piece of context that shows this wasn't just a sudden, heat-of-the-moment killing. This property dispute had already escalated into, psychological warfare.
This is the part about the guns, right?
Exactly. She claimed that before the killing, her son Milton had been firing guns in her yard to intimidate her.
So there are already red flags everywhere. This tells us both sides were armed, both sides were being aggressive, and this thing was escalating over time. Milton was signaling his defiance.
And Wadlington was just refusing to stop, probably because he felt his elite status and his rights as Mary's husband just superseded whatever claim Milton had. This wasn't a fight waiting to happen. It was already happening. It was a sustained, toxic, armed standoff.
So let's turn to the killer himself, Thomas B. Wadlington. The records don't give him a title like general or anything, but the network of support that just instantly surrounds him.
Oh, immediately.
And the sheer firepower of his legal team, it all points to him being an elite farmer, part of the local gentry. The Wadlington name clearly carried a lot of weight in Caldwell County.
Right, and his response right after the killing just underscores that status. His defense team included his own son-in-law, a man named William H. Miller.
And Miller wasn't just any lawyer.
Not at all. He's described as a major political player. He was involved in the Democratic State Convention. To be able to mobilize that level of political and legal power instantly for a murder charge, it just speaks volumes about Wadlington's wealth and his connections.
Most people could not get that kind of defense.
Not a chance. And Miller's actions, right from the first minute, are so revealing. His affidavit details finding Wadlington lying in a bed badly wounded in the thigh shortly after the incident.
Okay, so Wadlington was shot too.
He was. And Miller immediately takes control of the scene. He excludes other people. He is curating the defense narrative from minute one. And that narrative is that this was a encounter, a mutual struggle, a gunfight, and that Wadlington was the injured party acting in self-defense against his aggressive stepson.
So that sets up the whole conflict for the trial.
Why?
Was Wadlington defending himself from an armed attacker? Or was this a brutal, premeditated execution over some timber?
And the answer to that question determined not only Wadlington's life, but whose version of justice was going to win out in a community that was already teetering on the edge of chaos.
Which brings us to the core evidence, these two completely opposing stories of the killing and the really stark class dynamics that ended up deciding the verdict.
This is where the story gets so compelling. Because the fate of this wealthy, politically connected landowner, it depended almost entirely on the testimony of two men whose social standing was about as low as Wadlington's was high.
We're talking about John Prince and James Blalock.
Just a couple of farm laborers. The sources identify them as being nearby splitting rails.
And you can see the class tension immediately, because later on, Wadlington's powerful friends launch all these character attacks against these guys. They call them obscure, untrustworthy.
While at the same time they're swearing that Wadlington is a good citizen, peaceable, the elite really believed that their status should just automatically make their word more valuable than the word of a common rail splitter.
But the jury chose to believe the laborers. It was this fleeting moment where the whole social hierarchy of truth got turned upside down.
So let's get into James Blalock's version of events. This is the prosecution's key evidence. Blalock says he was about 10 steps behind Milton Cartwright when the final confrontation happened.
And he gives this devastating timeline. Earlier that morning, Blalock saw Wadlington and his son William pass by, and Wadlington was carrying a gun.
Then later, Cartwright shows up. He'd actually brought dinner for the laborers. And while he's there, he hears chopping and then the sound of a tree falling. That seems to be the final provocation.
So what does he do?
He tells Prince and Blalock that he's going to go talk to Wadlington about the timber, and this is a vital detail, he explicitly asks them to come with him.
He's gathering witnesses.
He's intentionally drawing witnesses, which completely contradicts the defense's story that he was the lone aggressor looking for a fight. So Blalock follows, and he says when they get there, Wadlington still has his gun.
And then what Blalock describes is just, it's brutal. It suggests a really cold, malicious intent.
The truly horrific sequence starts when Wadlington's son, William, allegedly takes an axe and strikes Cartwright 3 times with the blade on the back of the head.
From behind.
On the back of the head. This one detail just fundamentally destroys the defense's theory of a mutual gunfight, a rencounter.
Right. If you're fighting a man who's armed and ready for a shootout, why would your son need to sneak up and disable him from behind with an axe first?
Exactly. It confirms a level of malice and premeditation that just goes way beyond self-defense or sudden passion. The point was to disable Cartwright before the fatal shot.
And Blalock's testimony just gets worse. He says after the axe blows, Thomas Wadlington, the father, then places a pistol near Cartwright's head and shoots him right around the ear.
But even that wasn't the end of it. The son, William, then supposedly strikes him again on the forehead with the axe. And then the father, Thomas Wadlington, strikes him 2 more times with the axe.
It's just extreme, vicious overkill.
Committed by both father and son against a man who was almost certainly already down, if not dead. This level of violence testified to by these laborers must have just horrified the jury. Blalock says he then ran to call for help to get a man named Eli Nichols.
So this is the narrative, a planned, brutal assault that the jury ultimately believed over the carefully curated self-defense story from Wadlington's powerful legal team.
And that team fought this evidence with everything they had, mainly through some very sophisticated legal maneuvering. Wadlington's lawyer, Thomas C. Dabney, who was also a circuit judge himself, by the way.
Of course he was.
He tried to use the legal instructions for the jury to frame the whole dispute purely around property rights, to try and minimize the element of malice.
This is maybe the most complex, but also the most important legal detail of the whole trial, isn't it? It shows the level of defense Wadlington was getting.
It does. The defense proposed these very specific instructions for the jury. They basically wanted to introduce an instruction that said, look, if the jury believes Cartwright had no right to be on that dower land, then the killing was just a result of him interfering with property.
And that could maybe knock the charge down from murder to manslaughter?
That was the hope. They were trying to create a legal gray area to argue that the intent wasn't malice aforethought, this cold, calculated desire to kill, but an excessive, albeit deadly response to a provocation over property.
But the judge refused that instruction. Let's look at the exact wording, because this is key. The proposed instruction said that even if Cartwright had no right to be there, if the jury believed beyond reasonable doubt that Wadlington killed him with a deadly weapon for interfering to prevent him from cutting the timber, it is murder.
And the judge refused to give a different instruction that would have softened that. By refusing to water it down, the sitting judge was effectively telling the jury that they had to consider Wadlington's intent as malice.
So whether Cartwright was trespassing or not was irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant. The judge was ruling that killing a man with a deadly weapon and an axe just to stop him from interfering with timber cutting, that is murder. Full stop. And that judicial decision just completely eliminated Wadlington's property rights defense.
It forced the jury to confront the brutal evidence from the rail splitters.
But Wadlington, he never wavered. His response to the guilty verdict was just one of absolute defiance. He insisted the whole thing was based on false testimony. He specifically claimed his son, William, never placed his hands on Cartwright directly or indirectly.
He just refused to accept that the word of these low-status witnesses could convict him. He clung to his own narrative, his own sense of status.
Which really sets the stage for this dramatic showdown between the elite and the general populace that was defining Caldwell County right on the eve of the Civil War.
Okay, let's connect this really personal, fatal family feud to the much bigger picture. The social instability, the political fracturing in Caldwell County. This trial wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Not at all. The local social fabric was already polarizing violently months before the state itself tore apart. You have to understand, the community was already living in this environment of intense distrust.
This is where the regulators come in, right?
Yes. We have a letter from a George C. Bruno, and he talks about the local volatility, including the presence of regulators. These were basically local militias that formed because people just didn't trust the courts or the official legal system to provide any real justice.
So this murder trial was exactly the kind of thing that could just tip the whole community into chaos. Both sides believed their version of the truth was the only truth.
And you see that polarization so clearly in the conflicting affidavits that were sent directly to the governor, Beriah McGoffin, petitioning for clemency after the verdict.
Wadlington supporters, his elite peers, they claimed he was a good citizen, peaceable, and they insisted the killing was not of his seeking. They were appealing to the governor based purely on Wadlington's reputation and his social class.
They were essentially arguing that a man of his standing just couldn't possibly be a cold-blooded murderer.
But the opposition was just as passionate, and it reflects this really deep current of dissatisfaction with the local elite. There's an affidavit from a Norflet Jones.
What does he say?
He describes Wadlington as a rough naglier, a rough neighbor, violent and generally disregarded by his neighbors. And Jones says the guilty verdict was just and necessary for the best trust of society.
That's a profound split. One side is arguing for elite impunity based on status, and the other is arguing that this guy is a violent bully and the community is safer with him gone. It's a perfect mirror of the national political divide.
And the administrative records, the court order books, they just confirm this deep-seated instability. Between 1859 and 1866, you see this constant disruptive turnover of local power.
The government of Caldwell County was fracturing. In October 1861, right as the national crisis is peaking, the local leadership is just collapsing. The sheriff, Jesse Stevens, he resigns. James M. Harper is hastily appointed to fill the term.
It suggests local officials were just abandoning their posts, either because of political fear or because they were being swept up into military service.
And Wadlington's elite network. These weren't just wealthy guys. They were the regional political machine that was getting ready to embrace rebellion. His son-in-law, William H. Miller, was a huge figure in the Democratic State Convention.
So his defense team was squarely aligned with the pro-Southern political apparatus.
And even more significantly, one of Wadlington's most prominent supporters, a man named Willis B. Metchin, would very shortly go from supporting this condemned murderer directly to serving in the Confederate Congress.
The implication is just unavoidable. The very same men who rallied to protect Wadlington from a local jury's verdict were the same men who were about to lead the secessionist movement in Kentucky.
And you have to look at what happened to people who didn't have that elite political shield. The sources give us this really stark, painful example in one of Wadlington's neighbors, Lynn B. Baker.
The Baker family got swept into this financial and legal vortex of the war. They faced ruinous financial penalties specifically because of their loyalties.
Right. Lynn B. Baker was a unionist, and she was facing these devastating fines and forfeitures levied by the local authorities, who were increasingly controlled by pro-Confederate elements.
There's an affidavit from a C.D. Bradley to Governor Bramlett, and he says that paying these fines would nearly ruin her and her son Leander. He's pleading with the governor, saying the proud old state of Kentucky shouldn't wish to get money of old widows by such trickery.
It just shows how that breakdown of trust, the kind we saw in the Wadlington trial, quickly turned the legal system into a weapon for political revenge. The local power structure was using the courts to basically dismantle their union-aligned neighbors.
The property dispute over dower land had now blown up into partisan property confiscation.
Before we get to the final verdict and Wadlington's ultimate fate, we have to place this violence in the broader context of Caldwell County at that time, specifically through the institution of slavery.
There's this chilling parallel case from the same court during the same period, the trial of an enslaved man named West.
And the contrast between these two cases, Wadlington, the elite landowner, and West, who was legally human property, is just essential for understanding the justice system of the time.
West, who was the property of the estate of Jesse Williams, was indicted and convicted for the murder of a man named Edmund Stevens. But the key to that conviction, it wasn't West's own choice.
No. The evidence indicated that Jesse Williams, West's owner, had orchestrated the entire murder. The testimony showed Williams ordered West to kill Stevens, he gave him the gun, and he even whipped him when West came back a few times without having done it, apparently because Stevens' dog kept barking.
It highlights this environment of total, absolute control over life and death that was inherent in the system of slavery.
The rule of law in Caldwell County allowed an elite owner to use his human property as a proxy killer. But it was the proxy, the enslaved man West, who was convicted and sentenced to hang, the owner who ordered the murder. He apparently walked free, protected by his status.
It just shows that for some, life was incredibly cheap, and agency was non-existent. The law was an instrument of racial and class control. Wadlington, for all his trouble, had this powerful legal and political defense that West completely lacked.
And that brings us right back to the moment of decision in the Wadlington trial. The jury, made up of local citizens, his peers, they had to decide whose truth mattered more. Was it the self-serving story of the elite farmer, Wadlington?
Or the unvarnished, brutal testimony of the rail splitters, Prince and Blalock? And the jury found Wadlington guilty of murder.
The consequences were swift, and for the time they were shocking. His son, William Wadlington, who Blalock said swung the axe over and over, he was sentenced to 8 years in the penitentiary.
And Thomas B. Wadlington, the elite farmer who tried to leverage his status to justify a killing, was sentenced to be hanged to death.
This outcome is just. It's a deeply shocking, localized victory for a community trying to assert some control over its own internal violence. For one brief moment in 1860, the testimony of 2 farm laborers was accepted as truth over the entire political and social weight of the Wadlington network.
The community basically declared that property rights, even under a complex dower contract, did not give you a license to commit a brutal murder.
But Wadlington was not done. After being convicted, he seizes this moment in court to deliver this powerful, highly dramatic, and deeply religious statement. He casts himself as the persecuted victim and insists the whole verdict is based on lies.
It's more than just a claim of innocence. It's a political performance. It's designed to undermine the very legitimacy of what the jury found. His words from the source material were just incredible.
He says, "I can place my hand upon my heart and call my God to witness that I speak the words of truth when I say that your honor has passed sentence upon my child and is now in the act of passing sentence upon your persecuted prisoner to be hanged to death, all by reason of false testimony."
His challenge isn't just to the judge or the jury. He's targeting the credibility of the witnesses directly, appealing to this higher religious authority that he believes will validate his status over their sworn testimony.
And this is the most dramatic part of the whole record, he says. "When these young men who have testified falsely against me meet me at the bar of God, where false testimony cannot come, my statements in open court will stand as the truth, and their sworn testimony will fall."
He's saying they're lying and God knows it. He goes on to say they testified falsely against him in material and important points, and falsely against his child in toto, completely.
He's using his own morality, his connection to God, as a higher form of evidence. He's just rejecting the entire secular legal process that was based on the testimony of men he saw as beneath him. And his final dramatic plea was, "Give me justice or give me death."
It just shows the profound shock and disbelief that a man of his standing could actually be held accountable based on the word of rail splitters. The verdict was a rupture in the social order.
But, as we know, the elite machinery, it rarely stops working. Immediately after the verdict, Wadlington's powerful supporters, the same political establishment about to guide Kentucky into civil war, they petitioned Governor Magoffin for executive clemency.
And this is where the system of status just reasserts itself. The judicial system, the jury of peers who believed the evidence, they sentenced him to death.
But the political system, the governor and the power of executive clemency, that was the ultimate backstop against accountability for the elite.
The sources strongly imply that this political intervention worked, that Wadlington's sentence was ultimately commuted. The community's attempt to police its own was effectively vetoed by the same class of people who had supported Wadlington all along.
So the verdict might have been a temporary victory for the farm laborers, but the political maneuvering ensured that the elite ultimately won.
Which brings us to our final synthesis. The Wadlington trial is so much more than a true crime story. It's a micro-study of the American conflict. It's a dispute over land and entitlement that just evolved into deadly violence and exposed these deep, pre-existing fault lines of class and kinship just months before the whole country exploded.
Caldwell County was literally tearing apart at the seams, and the question of who had the right to cut down a tree reflected these deep anxieties about wealth, control, and respect. When Wadlington killed his stepson, he broke the family bond, but the trial proved the community was too fractured to just obey the dictates of the wealthy anymore. They chose to believe the laborers.
But that larger, darker context is always there. We know the state executed the enslaved man, West, based on testimony that his owner had ordered the killing. That's a clear case of power being used against the powerless.
Meanwhile, Wadlington, the elite farmer sentenced to death by the testimony of rail splitters, ultimately sees his sentence disappear through the intervention of his politically powerful friends.
Which raises this really important, persistent question for you, the listener, to think about. A question that resonates anytime you look at justice systems in times of great instability.
The jury, based on the evidence, condemned Wadlington. But the system of executive clemency allowed the elite network, the same network poised to lead the state into war, to just override the community's verdict.
So we have to ask, when the powerful are caught and condemned by a local justice system, how often is justice ultimately just a matter of who has the right connections to reach the governor's office? Does access truly trump accountability?
A chilling question. And a reminder that historical truth is rarely found just in the court records, but in the political maneuvering that always follows.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Wadlington Files. We hope it gave you a deeper understanding of how the great American schism played out on the most intimate and fatal of levels.
Until next time.